So today's Cardinal lesson, we're talking about estate planning for the surviving spouse. So what that means is people come into us generally in their 60s, sometimes in their 50s, sometimes one of them or both of them are 70-ish or 70 something. But they're coming in and they're generally enjoying retirement, getting ready for retirement, and they're planning out the retirement together. And what usually happens when you look backwards and we're looking forwards when we're doing planning is one of the two people are going to pass away before the other. And many clients, when they come into us and we start broaching this subject, they've already figured it out. He's going to go first. He's already figured it out. And then he's worried about her and how she's going to survive being a widow. Okay. And sometimes it's reversed. But we're going to work, and when we're doing financial planning, that it could be either one of you. And so we want to plan things, and we want to show you in this video some of the things that happen if you don't do planning. So I want to bring Tom on, and I really want him to talk first about why we're doing this video today.
Yeah, I think like Hans said, typically one spouse is going to pass away before the other. It's not common that both die, right together. And when that happens, it upends, your life is not only emotionally, but there could be real repercussions financially as well. And so what we want to do today is really talk through what happens at the death of the first spouse. And then secondly, what can we do to plan to help make that, better. It's not going to be a good situation when one of you passes away, right? But we want to make, at least from a financial standpoint, less bad. And that's where the planning comes into play.
Okay, so we're going to start today, and we're going to talk about all 7 of the worries. And we're going to start with the worry about taxes. And we're going to show you something that happens after the first spouse dies. And so, most of our clientele, especially in retirement, they're up in their 70s, 80s, and that first spouse passes away. They're kind of in this middle category here, and they've been filing jointly, taking the almost $30,000 standard deduction, and then paying taxes, in the 10%, the 12%, the 22%, the 24%, somewhere in that category because of the married thresholds on the high end for those, or the low end. However you want to look at it. And when the first person passes away, the survivor moves over here to the single rates. And you start comparing this chart. I want to bring Tom on to talk about this a little bit more.
Yeah. And so I'm going to bring up the show notes because I'll make it a little bit bigger than the board here. But you can find these show notes in the link below of our video. They're also on our website. The third page in the show notes, let me see if I can make this a little bigger for you guys. If you can't see it, go and print it out. It's here. But the point we want to make is, if you look at these tax brackets, let's just look at the 22% tax bracket. If you get to the top of the 22% tax bracket as a single filer and $95,000, a married couple is $190,000. It's double. It's literally double the income at the same tax bracket. And so when we're looking at planning for this, when the first spouse passes away, there will be a reduction in certain types of income. And we'll get to that a little bit later in the show. But things like RMDs, distributions out of your IRAs or 401ks, that doesn't change. The RMD amount stays the same, assuming you guys are similar ages. And now you're filing it at tax rates that are cut in half. You get there twice as fast, so they're higher. And so one of the things we want to do is plan for that, is just look forward to the future, make sure that we're doing things now to prevent the surviving spouse all of a sudden having less income from Social Security and the like, but now having to pay higher taxes on that income. That could really leave them in a potentially a bad situation if proper planning isn't done.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a sad situation because we've had clients who die, and then at some point they're coming to us, or sometimes right after they die, because we're going to help them with the settling of the estate and beneficiaries and file for things, and they all of a sudden realize that in the year of death, because we tell them the year of death, they still get to file a joint tax return. And so now we're sitting here, the person has just passed away, and we're talking to their widow or widower about making some tax moves to take advantage of this. That's not a very good situation, but we're obligated to do that because we're fiduciaries and to be doing right after a person passes away. Okay, so we want to move on to the next one, which is the whole thing we're doing with this video is we're talking about estate planning, and we're talking about the first benefactor of estate planning is the surviving spouse. I mean, we have many clients come into us, and when we're asking them the questionnaire and we're planning and we start talking about estate, they start getting into, oh, I'm not really worried about leaving a bunch of money to the kids. I'm just worried about this money's for us, and then whatever's left the kids can have. And so they're kind of like, let's not spend a lot of time on that. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. In our world, estate planning starts with the surviving spouse, and especially in second marriages. This is when the first spouse dies, and this is a second marriage, and we got kids in separate categories and relationships. This is a problem, and it's an estate planning problem. But really, most people, when they're a married couple, they're doing planning, they're in their 60s, they have a genuine concern for each other, is the one that lives on is going to need to be well taken care of. So, and some examples of this is that the surviving spouse could live a long time. I mean, we have a lot of situations where people are living into their 90s. Certainly one of them, if both of them live into their 90s, I mean, you're really not going to get into a lot of this stuff. But if one of them goes in their 80s or 70s and the other one lives on to the 90s, it could be a long time. The surviving spouse could remarry, and that's an estate planning consideration. I mean, if they remarried, then they would get back into the married filing jointly, but we're not going to really plan for all that. But it is a factor when they start laying out where, I'm leaving the money to the kids, but I'm leaving it all to my spouse at the first death, and then it's going to go to the kids. She's going to leave it to the kids, or he's going to leave it to the kids, and then they remarry. We got to get back in and do some estate planning right at the beginning of that marriage. And then you get into second marriage inheritance concerns, which I just talked about. We have several case studies that we're working with right now that there are second marriages, and the kids are from separate marriages, and people have come up with, well, we decided to do this, that, and the other thing. And I'm telling you, if that's your situation, is a lot of people that are living the good life in retirement, really that surviving spouse, whoever it is going to need all the money to make it along. So you better rethink and plan those things of if the kids that their parent has just passed away, if they come to the funeral and find out that all the money went to their stepmother, I mean, it's just, so we need to do some planning around that and some thinking through, and life insurance is a great solution to that. So that's with estate planning. Now we want to talk about income, is what happens to the income of the survivor. I mean, the smaller check stops. So with Social Security, so we'll go over that in a second. So they're going to go from 2 checks to 1 check. So that's a reduction in income, especially if the checks were close. But regardless, it's 2 checks to 1 check. In the marriage passed to the kids, so if there's IRA money or other assets that were producing income, and this is a second marriage, and those assets go to the kids of the first marriage, then that's going to be a further reduction for the surviving spouse of income. And pensions reduce or stop for people that still have pensions and they're living off of those. They're either going to stop or they're going to cut in half. So I want to bring Tom on to talk about income and what you see, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely an area that certain types of income absolutely go away or get reduced or stop when the first spouse passes away. We'll get to Social Security a little bit later, but on the pension side of things, a lot of people, when they're first retiring, they're not really looking to the future. They're making the decision now. They get that sheet that says, here are your different options. And they just look at the reduction that they would take now by taking a survivor payout, what would my spouse get if I were to pass away? They say, oh, we're not worried about that. I'm just going to take the higher check. I mean, that might be the right choice for you, but just to default to that. And a lot of times they're not even talking with their spouse about that. Their spouse doesn't even know what decision they made, a couple of years ago. If you've already made the decision, we can't go back and undo it. But if you're at that point where you're making the decision, you really need to think through, play out different scenarios. Okay, yes, I'm taking less income now, but is it really going to, if I were to pass away first, where does this leave my spouse, in terms of them? So again, everyone's situation is different. We don't always recommend take 100% joint survivor benefit, but that is an area that you need to do some thinking, about when you're electing that choice.
All right. Why don't you stay on, Tom? So we talked about income. Now we're going to get over to 401k, IRA, and we're going to talk about RMDs continue. So when the first spouse passes away, you pass away, your spouse is going to be faced, if you're similar in ages, with the same RMDs on a larger amount. The Roth conversions are more expensive. I mean, so if you've put off Roth conversions, I mean, we had, Tom, you had a case study where that actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, we had someone come in, and what they were considering doing was doing Roth conversions while both of them were alive. And we ran through all the numbers. I showed them how it would benefit them long term. And they just got down to it and say, we really don't want to pay the taxes now. I mean, that ultimately is what it amounts to. And I will warn you, Roth conversions are not a lot of fun the year you do them. I mean, you drive your taxes up way more than they otherwise would be. And so it's painful. But and that was sort of where they ended up, is they didn't do any Roth conversions. So we fast forward a year or two. The husband is sick. He unfortunately ends up passing away. The wife is coming back in, and she, she's happened to be right at 73, just starting RMDs, and she's starting to look at these tax brackets. And if we talked about it in the first part of the show, is these tax rates now are cut in half. I mean, in other words, as she gets to those tax brackets twice as fast. And so she's having to pay taxes at a much higher rate off the same balance, because how RMDs are calculated is they look at the balance, the IRA or 401k balance of the previous year. That does not change when the first spouse passes away. And they look at your age, and there's a percentage off that. So you're having to take the same dollar amount out, paying higher taxes on it. It's really, and then it drives up taxes on Social Security. I mean, it had a sort of cascading effect, and they would have been much better off doing Roth conversions in the previous years. But they, again, a lot of times some of the decisions you make are short sighted, and you're not really taking into consideration the long term impacts of whatever decision you're making.
Okay. So let's talk about long-term care. When the first one goes, second one lives on. I mean, the very first thing is, we're assuming here that the person might have been using long-term care before they died. Okay. And most likely their spouse was taking care of them at some level, even if they had long-term care insurance. I mean, the spouse bears quite a burden when their loved one, and they're married, their spouse needs long-term care. So when the second one is surviving and living on, they got no spouse to take care of them. I mean, that's just the situation that I wanted to point out. Then the second one is when they have long-term care, if they have pooled benefits, or they've got, where one spouse can use the other one's benefit, or regardless, is that we have one spouse may have used up some or all of the benefits of the other spouse. So that's a consideration. And what we do in a lot of these cases is, when they start using it up, we go in of a pooled benefit policy and they're using up most of it. We're going to take the healthy spouse and sell them another long-term care policy where they're protected for the long run. And, people have depleted savings because of long-term care, because that spouse probably is going to use some long-term care before they pass away. And to the extent that you've had to pay for that, or maybe you've had to pay for all of it because you didn't have long-term care insurance, the savings and all these other things are depleted. Okay. Now, when we talk about Medicare, and so with Medicare, I mean, if you're somebody that's subject to IRMA, or maybe you were just under the married threshold for IRMA. And IRMA is about $200,000 a year, $197,000 a year of adjusted gross income. So if you were a married couple and you were at 170, for instance, combined income, he dies, she lives on, then her IRMA is going to be evaluated as a single person, which the maximum for that is about 97,000, something like that. And so it's it's a factor. A single person pays way more IRMA than a married person. Medical costs of the deceased stop, so that's a positive that you're not having to pay medical bills anymore. But typically, they're taking care of Medicare, and then medical advocacy and transportation for the survivor. I mean, a married couple, one of them is not doing well, and they need to be taken to the doctor. It's the healthy spouse that's talking to the doctor, making the decisions, then driving to the pharmacy to get the drugs, taking them to the other doctor, taking them for procedures, being there, being an advocate. That's all gone. So now when you have the survivor, this person that's alone, we got to look to the adult children to be that person that's going to be an advocate and who's going to provide the transportation for the person who can't drive.
And on that same note, another important piece is going to be the power of attorneys, the legal documents, right? I mean, when you have a married couple, you can make decisions. A lot of doctors will talk to the spouse, but when it's a child, less. They're much more hesitant to talk to you unless you have that legal document in place, the power of attorney that gives you the legal ability to talk to medical providers on the behalf of your parent. If you're the parent, your child, give your child that ability. So that's something that you definitely want to have set up in place.
Absolutely. And, I mean, when you're onto the power of attorney documents, when we provide that service or through an attorney, we're going to generally recommend that you name your spouse first, and then your adult children or one of your adult children second, and then maybe the other one third. But you don't have that spouse anymore. So now if you've done these documents in advance, your kids or one of your kids is now your power of attorney. So that's a whole service that we provide in financial planning, and you need to check that and prepare for your older ages. And really, the last box, I haven't been keeping up with checking my boxes here, but the last box is the Social Security. And Social Security is pretty simple. When one spouse passes away, the other one survives, the smaller check goes away or stops. We've already talked about that. So we've covered really all 7 worries that we do in every video. And we talked about some things that happen, and some of them are going to happen whether you plan for them or not. But we base a lot of our planning around this contingency for married couples. And so down the middle of the board, we want to talk about some of the tools that we can use to solve for this. And so we can start out, we can talk about life insurance. Life insurance fixes a lot of things. I mean, it can replace that lost Social Security check. So especially if one of the deaths happens early in retirement and the other one has to live on for a lot of years with only one check, we can effectively replace that check or replace some of it with tax-free life insurance benefit. We can talk about a lifetime annuity payments. So we can structure annuities in such a way that they're going to make payments when both of you are alive, and they're payments for life, but yet the payment doesn't reduce when the first one dies. There's a payment for life if either of the couple is still living. So if one person dies at 73, the other one lives to 97, that annuity is paying the same checks all the way to 97. Okay. We talked earlier about Roth conversions, and Roth conversions are something that we recommend to a lot of people to do to an extent, spread them out over a number of years. But you want to take advantage of your Roth conversions where you've got high amounts in the 24% and the 22%, high thresholds of jumping into the next bracket. And if you wait to try to do Roth conversions till after the first person passes away, you've waited a little too long. Delays the Social Security check for the larger check. So if we've got two people, and like my wife and I'm 65, she's 63, soon to be 64, and my check is going to be much bigger than hers. So we're going to delay mine till 70, and we're going to delay hers, or we are delaying hers, till full retirement, which is 67 for her, almost 67. And so the effect of that is my larger check is going to go on for the survivor for the rest of their life. So even though I wait till 70, if I die at 77 and she's still alive and lives up till 90, she's going to go down to one check. Hers is going to go away, but it's going to be a much bigger check. So in the planning, we have an eye toward taking the larger check, and if there's any way possible, delaying that as long as we can.
And I think on that note too, a lot of times when we bring this up, a lot of people will say, I want my check now because what if I don't live long enough to get this benefit? I mean, that is a consideration, right? We want to take that into
Yeah.
account. But what they're ignoring is the impact that's going to have on their spouse. I mean, with their words, they're telling us, like, I really want to make sure my spouse is okay, whether that's a husband or wife. I want to make sure they're okay. But then on the next breath, they say, I want to take my check now. It's like, well, let's take a step back and really think about this. Is yes, there is the chance that you could die young and not get the check. And you personally do not benefit from that higher check. But it leaves your spouse in a much better position long term. And so, again, not everybody it makes sense to delay it, but a lot of people, more than that are currently doing it, should be delaying their check all the way till 70.
Yeah, and somebody that wants to start their check before 70 or like now, and they reject that. I mean, you don't have to implement all this stuff. They can buy some life insurance with their spouse as the beneficiary, so that if they go early, that then their spouse has to live on a smaller check, they get a life insurance benefit. So long-term care insurance. I mean, just having long-term care insurance is going to, first of all, it's going to be great while you're both alive and the first one is ill and needing care. You're not going to be using your estates and getting everything down. And then secondly, it's going to be there, the long-term care insurance for the survivor, so we don't add that bill to the already reduced income. RMD planning, required minimum distribution planning, just in general, we plan this way, and we kind of plan for the 80s and the 90s when RMDs get pretty significant, to understand that there may be just one spouse living, and that one person might be paying taxes at single rates. So we can put all that stuff in the computer and really plan out our RMDs. And there's also no RMDs on Roths.
And I think that also with the RMD too, the R part is required. And so most times we're having people take more than the minimum. The required minimum distribution is a lot of times it makes sense to take more than the minimum. And that's where that planning comes into play is we want to take advantage of the tax brackets, take advantage of your other income is, and start winding down these IRAs or 401ks because it's not great money to leave to the surviving spouse. It's definitely not great money to leave to the next generation, the kids. And so that's where a lot of the planning comes in, where we really just want to have a tax plan in place to minimize the tax on the life of this money, not just in each individual year.
The 100% survivor on pensions. I'm not blatantly recommending this. I'm just telling you, consider it when you're doing your pension. Or if you don't take the 100% survivor on your pension, then consider buying some life insurance to cover the fact that you may die well before your spouse and they're going to get something less than 100%. But what this is saying is those people that do take 100% survivor, when the first one passes away, the survivor is not going to have a reduction in the pension. And of course, that's for people with pensions. And then estate tax planning. So this would be for people with large estates. And we really, when we're dealing with a large estate, we're not really dealing with the survival of the survivor, or we're not dealing with, okay, so one person passed away, now the second one lives on, and they've still got this large estate. Well, they don't really have a money problem, they got a tax problem. And there's a lot of things we can do in estate planning to try to minimize estate taxes. And estate tax portability. And that what portability really talks about is the standard exemption is now pretty large, and there's a projected change in that in 2026, or actually it's by law it's going to change, it's going to go down, and there's ways to utilize some of that while you're still alive. And then secondly, when the first spouse passes, there's a way to make their standard exemption or their exemption portable. So I'm not going to get into a lot of estate planning stuff today, but these are, the MBAs would call that levers that we can pull, or strategies that we can use, or a combination of these to mitigate the reduced income for the surviving spouse. So with that being said, I want to thank you for listening.
Thank you.